Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Bird, and I'm the host of the TD show. This show is new to US Chess Twitch stream, and we will be coming to you hopefully every week to give you some hints and tips on how to be a TD in the US. This week, I am joined by National Tournament Director Jeff Wiewel. Jeff is also a FIDE arbiter, and Jeff is the current vice chair of the Tournament Director Certification Committee, of known as the TDCC. And Jeff has also formerly been the chair of that said same committee, and that will be very appropriate to us tonight as we are going to discuss how to go about upgrading your Tournament Director Certification. Evening, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Good. Jeff, you've been, I know here you've been a chief TD of many of the big national scholastic events and big events across the country. How did you get into being a tournament director?
The president of our chess club back in '82 was doing a small scholastic, and he suddenly found out it wasn't as small as he expected it to be. So he begged for people to help him out.
Okay. And so now what got you on the process of becoming moving up through the ranks and becoming a national TD? Is it something you aspired to do or just something that happened naturally?
Something that happened naturally. I got so involved with scholastics in Illinois that I did plenty of tournaments to qualify for local, senior, and we had a few nationals in the area, so that gave me enough to go for the associate national and then national without even needing to go out of state. And I qualified for some of those requirements back when they were more stringent than they currently are. It has been getting somewhat easier over the years.
Okay. And Jeff, I mentioned the TDCC, the Tournament Director Certification Committee. What's the work of I mean, what does the TDCC do?
We oversee the tests. We handle a lot of appeals. When someone says, hey, the tournament director did something wrong in this tournament, so I'm paying my fee and I'm going to call the TDCC to take a look at this and obviously punish the guy. And in a majority of those cases, we do not find the TD at fault. Sometimes we do, and we recommend sanctions to the executive board. If we find the complaint frivolous, which is 15-20% of the time, the person that's filing it does not get their filing fee back.
Okay.
So we all handle some waiver requests when people are asking for variations for running tournaments. And
okay. Great. And how long have you been on the TDCC, Jeff, including just being a regular committee member, chair, and now vice chair?
I believe I started in 2008.
Okay.
And I didn't become the vice chair in 2010, and then later up to chair, and then back down to vice chair.
All right.
We kind of rotated.
All right. So the reason I invited Jeff on tonight was I've been with US Chess now for about 6 months. And Tournament Director Certification is one of my many roles there, overseeing them. So if you send in a test and get it graded, I don't necessarily mark them all myself, not the high level tests, but the multiple choice ones I definitely are responsible for marking and sending back to you. I think I know how the process works now, but during our presentation here, whenever I go wrong, Jeff is here to put me right. So I'm sure hopefully that will not happen, but we'll see as we go along here. So let's get on right now with the presentation of how to go about upgrading your tournament director certification. We can take some questions in the chat as we go along. Please try and keep them on topic. You know, as much as we like to answer regular rules questions, we want to try and keep this to the topics at hand each week. And then after the presentation, we're going to have some brief trivia to see if you've actually listened to what we've been saying and not just fizzed us out a little bit. And then we can the show will actually be recorded and placed on our US Chess YouTube channel for you to peruse and look at later on. So really quickly, let's switch over here to show you. So the first thing we want to talk about is why do you want to upgrade your tournament director certification? I came up with various little things here, some a little funnier than the others, but if you're a club TD, you're not meant to be working certain big events with numbers, and we'll get into that later. So you can be the chief TD of much bigger events, and you legitimately be the chief TD of bigger events. You can be the chief TD of more prestigious events. A quick example of that, 2012, I got asked to be the chief TD of the US Championship. At that stage of my life, I was a senior tournament director, and so I had to say, I can't actually be the chief TD of the US Championship. However, it worked out that I'd met the experience requirements. I went ahead, took the test, passed it, and in 2012, I was the chief TD of the US Championship. So you can work through that. You have longer time between renewals, so each, if you're anything but a national tournament director, you get renewed after a certain number of years, and again, we'll cover that. The higher certification you are, the longer that period between renewals. You have the ability to move into FIDE international events, so once you're at senior TD level, you can move on, become higher, and you possibly get better pay as a higher level tournament director. That comes with a huge caveat, of course. I don't know if a lot of tournament directors are actually in it for the pay. Some are, some aren't. So, but if you are a higher level, chances are you might get the gig over someone who's not a higher level, or you might price yourself out. You know, it has a has a bit of a double-edged sword to it. So anyway, so that's just a few of the reasons why you might want to upgrade your tournament director certification. I think I had in here at one stage more respect. I think if someone's asking two tournament directors a question, one's a club TD, one's a national tournament director TD, I think chances are they might listen to the NTD a little more, but they should definitely still listen to both TDs. So let's cover the tournament director levels that we have right now, right? So you're going to be one of these levels. You have to be. The lowest level we have is a club TD. What can the club TD do? What can't they do? Well, you're not allowed to be the chief TD of a national, international, or a Grand Prix event. So that's pretty basic. You should not be the chief TD of events or sections expected to draw more than 50 players or 60 players if you're using a computer to do the pairings, say, and you also have an assistant tournament director. So 50 players is your limit if you're a club TD. Now that's being a chief TD, and we'll cover that a little later what that means. But so if you want to do more than 50 players, legitimately, you have to become a higher level than a club TD. So a lot of chess clubs in the land probably don't have 50 players playing in their events. So you're probably fine to be a club TD at those things. Your testing requirement, every club tournament director must take a test after the initial 3 years. There is no getting around that. So after 3 years of being a club TD, you have to take a test. And the passing score to renew your club level is 70%. But if you score 80% or greater and have met whatever the experience requirements are to become a local TD, you will be upgraded to a local TD at that stage. And then after the initial 3 years, if you remain a club TD, it's renewed every 3 years. And you have to, without every level, you have to take a test after these number of years. However, that test requirement is waived if you meet the activity requirement of being a chief TD or chief assistant TD 3 events within 3 years. So that's 1 event a year you've got to be chief or chief assistant of. And that includes just being a chief or a chief assistant of a section within an event. So not an onerous, sort of activity requirement at all. You'd be amazed how many people get club TD and then never seem to do anything along those lines. They work events, but they don't get the credits, etc. So they don't meet that activity requirement, which means they have to do another test if they want to remain a club TD. Moving on to being a local TD, the next step up, you can't be the chief TD of a national or an international FIDE-rated event. And you should not be the chief TD of events or sections expected to draw more than 100 players. So now you've sort of doubled your capacity as a tournament director. You can do 120 if you have a computer and also have an assistant TD with you. And now your renewal requirement becomes every 4 years. So it's very very simple. You see how this is working here. 4 events within the last 4 years. So again, 1 event a year. But it's important that you're either the chief TD or chief assistant TD of that event or section, and then you get that test requirement is waived. Moving on up, we've got senior TD. Now, senior obviously can take on a little more responsibility. So you can't be the chief TD of national events, but you should not be the chief TD of events or sections expected to draw more than 300 players. I'll just say, I think, Jeff, the idea is the wording on this in the requirements, it specifically says may not and then should not. I think the idea is that should you organize an event and suddenly you end up with 380 players, for instance, you're still okay to sort of be the chief TD of that, but because maybe you weren't expecting that many players.
That's why it says expected to draw.
Yeah. So if your expectation is that you're only going to draw 250 players and you end up with 400 players, you're okay to be the chief TD of that. But for the next year, well, you might have to change your expectations and therefore change your level to be the chief TD for the next year on. Once you reach senior, you can become a FIDE arbiter and start working your steps through doing international events, FIDE rated events, starting with your national arbiter license and then working up to become an FA and an international arbiter. And then senior is now 5 years and 5 events. So again, 1 event a year, but you got to do 5 events within the last 5 years. And remember, if you don't get that activity requirement, you do have to pass the senior TD test again. It's not you suddenly pass a lower level test. You have to, it's hard work to pass the senior tournament director test. You'll have to pass another version of that test to maintain your senior TD
I'm going to interrupt for a moment.
Yep.
Another reason for the should not be expected of tournaments expected is on occasion you will have emergency situations. There was one time when I was the floor chief and the chief TD of our state school grade got into a car accident the night before the tournament. And we didn't have a replacement. So I stepped in as the overall chief, and I was only a local at the time. So that was not a tournament I should have been the chief of, but it was either that or there would be no tournament. And from that personal experience, I really firmly believe that should not be is accurate because I got through, but it was not easy.
Right. And these levels or these number of players are specifically designed based on what your sort of experience requirements would be at this level and what the TDCC has sort of determined you should be able to handle now based on your experience and what you've claimed and passing the tests, right? Is that a fair reflection of what?
Yeah.
That should be, yeah. All right, so moving on past the senior, once you're a senior, you can then move on to become an associate national TD, NTD as we know it. So now the chief TD becomes national events averaging 150 players or more in the last 5 years, which has a special category term for that, but we'll cover that later. And also the US Championship, US Women's Championship, and US Junior Championship. Again, you can be a FIDE arbiter ANTD because you're above senior now. And the ANTD requirement is every 6 years. So 6 events within 6 years. You get renewed every 6 years. I think most of the times I've only had a few ANTDs to renew in my first 6 months on board, and they've all met that activity requirement. So most people do. It is a bit of a stepping stone to NTD. Which is the last level, and as high as you can go in the US chess world. You can become a national tournament director like myself and Jeff, and I think Enrique Herrera is in the chat. Enrique is also a national tournament director, and you have no restrictions on the US chess rated events that you can be the chief tournament director of. You can become a FIDE arbiter as well, and there's no activity requirements needed. So once you receive that title is for life. So I never have to work an event again, and I will retain my National Tournament Director certification. Whether that's right or not, I don't know, but that is what is has been determined right now, and I don't foresee that changing. But yeah, but I mean, most NTDs still work a lot of events and still get involved on various levels, but we have no NTD, no activity requirement for NTDs. Enrique just informed me that Karen Pennock is also watching. Karen is also a recently acquired National Tournament Director, so congratulations, Karen, on passing the NTD test and becoming an NTD. Let's move on a little bit now. Now we've covered the Tournament Director levels. We're going to go on to some general testing requirements. So what do you need to get the test? Well, you've got to be an active US Chess member. So, and this is probably a Tournament Director thing. If your membership actually expires, your TD certification expires. So once one lapses, the other lapses. Now, if you contact us and say, oh my gosh, my membership expired a couple of months ago, I've just renewed it, what do I need to do? Chances are we're going to reactivate you. I think, Jeff, is there a time limit on that reactivation?
There's nothing set in stone, but it's currently 6 months, I believe.
About 6 months? Okay, so if you contact us, say 8 months after your membership lapses, and we go to reactivate you, you may have to take a test at that level to get your certification back. So if you're a senior tournament director, your membership lapses for a couple of years, and you decide to get back into chess, hey, what? Before you get your TD certification back, you're going to have to pass that senior tournament director test again. So just be aware of that. So it's very important, if you are a tournament director, to maintain an active US Chess membership. You must also, if you're upgrading, you must have an established regular rating, at least 26 regular over-the-board games. It means an established rating before taking the local TD test or higher. So again, if you're a club TD, you don't have to have an established regular rating, but you can never go anywhere beyond club TD, no matter how much experience requirements you meet. So you must have that regular rating. I got a quick question about the active US Chess membership. Yes, if you're an NTD, you must maintain your active US Chess membership, and if it lapses, you may have to pass the NTD test to get that back again, even though we said it was for life. So I'm not quite sure on that, Jeff. What do you think?
Yeah, that's true. And
Right.
I know we've had ANTDs that have lapsed because of that. I don't know of any NTDs that have actually lapsed because of that, because NTDs are also more likely to buy a life membership.
Yep. I know my membership expired at the end of this month, and I just renewed it a couple of days ago. So even as a US Chess staff member, I still have to buy my US Chess membership, which is fine. So and then also you must meet various experience requirements based on your TD position at chess events and the category of each event. And we're going to yes, get your membership renewed, Enrique. So we're going to cover categories very soon, but there are experience requirements that you have to meet. So it's all based on your position at chess events and the category of each event, and that gets you your experience requirements. But these other things about having a regular rating and a US Chess membership is also equally important. So what do I mean by position at event? So we'll just quickly cover your sort of standard chess event and how it sort of runs. If you're running a small club and you're the only TD there, chances are you just have the chief TD position and nothing else on this flowchart. If you go to work a big event, the chances are you're going to have a chief TD, who's going to have a chief assistant TD, and then various sections. So you have an open section, an under 22, a under 2000. Each of those could have a section chief TD, and within the section chief, there could be section chief assistant TDs. And then you have your regular worker bees, who are the TDs that do everything else, and regular floor TDs. You've got backroom TDs. The other thing to remember is that your backroom TDs could also be listed as section chief assistant TDs. There's various things how this all works in here. But primarily for experience requirements for becoming a tournament director, Chief TD, Chief Assistant TD, Section Chief TD, Section Chief Assistant TD are the 4 most important things that you will need. And what we're basically going to do, I'm going to show you quickly on the US Chess MSA what this means. So pulling up the 2019 National Open real quick. I'll answer that question in a second, Chess Refinery. So the 2019 National Open here, you've got the Chief TD, who just happened to be myself. Brian Yang is the person listed as the Chief Assistant TD. And then talking about Enrique was there too. And then if we pop down into the section, you'll see here within the section, so this is now the under 2300, we have the Chief TD, and this is the Section Chief now, who is Karen Pennock, and then the Chief Assistant TD was Marat Thorpe, and then we had other tournament directors working within that section too. And you'll notice that each section has, I believe, different section chief and chief assistant TDs. I think John was a backroom guy who was listed as the chief assistant TD for that section, and Larry Bell was working on the floor, and he was the chief TD primarily for the under 19 and I think a couple of other sections too. So that's how it works within MSA. So let's pop back over now and carry on over here. And there was a question quickly from Chess Refinery, an extension on the 4-year expiration of FIDE Arbiter seminar norm. No, as far as I'm aware from what I've received from FIDE, no. And also, to touch on that, the 4-year expiration actually is from when the date that the seminar finished. So you have 4 years from the date of the seminar finishing to get your application in. So just be aware of that. So that's touching on FIDE stuff, which is what I wasn't really touching on that for US Chess, but since the question was asked, I figured I'd answer that real quickly since I knew the answer. So moving on real quickly, one of the things we have to cover is what does it mean by Chief TD versus a Section Chief TD? Well, in the regulations for the Tournament Director Certification, so let me quickly show you. We're going to quickly go over here and find the Tournament Director Certifications. If we go to the US Chess website and hit Tournament Directors, hopefully this is loading up for you guys, and you see TD certification rules. Within these regulations, if this loads up, come on, there we go. So you've got, I think, many 17 pages of regulations here, but various times it refers to you must be the Chief TD of various things. So here, for instance, your performance is Chief TD, Chief Assistant TD. So where it relates to those in the regulations, actually, they also mean Section Chief TD, and the wording for that is interchangeable. So every time it says Chief TD in the regulations, it also means Section Chief TD. So just be aware of that. There is a difference between them then. Obviously, the Chief TD is responsible for the entire event and can use the total number of players in all sections meeting the round requirements. That means if you've got 5 sections and a total of 500 players, say for instance in the event, you can get credit for a 500 player event. So just be aware that but you've got to be the overall Chief TD. If you're the Chief Assistant TD overall, meaning not a section, you also get credit for that number as well. And then you've got Section Chief TD, which is responsible only for a certain section of an event, or sections of an event, but you can only use the number of players in the largest section that meet the round requirements. So even, for instance, that example I gave where there's 5 sections, each section has 100 players, which is a bad example here. But if you're Section Chief of 3 of those sections, you only get credit for 100 players because that's the largest section that you're the chief of. So it's very important to be aware of that. So let's talk about event categories really quickly. Someone's asking, again, I'm trying not to answer the FIDE stuff, but someone's asking, how long after you become a national arbiter do you have to get an experience credit? Well, actually, being a national arbiter allows you to work FIDE events. You can't actually become an FA until you've taken the FA seminar. So you can continue to be a licensed national arbiter for as long as you want. But if you want to progress, you've got to become a FIDE arbiter and attend the FIDE arbiter seminar. So anyway, back to event categories for US chess. Category D, and you'll see that in the regulations, is a US chess rated Swiss with fewer than 50 players. So as you see, club TDs are really can do category D events. Yep. So this is where it all sort of aligns up now. Category C is US chess rated Swiss between 50 to 99 players. So that should be local TDs because they can do up to 100 players. Yeah. And category B, US chess rated Swiss with 100 or more players. So if it's a category B, you have 120, 150 players in your event. It's a category B event. Now there is another category beyond that, which is category A, and it sort of takes B to another level in that it's a US chess rated Swiss with 300 or more players. Plus, you've got to give at least $5,000 or more in cash prizes. So, that's category A. And then moving on, there are some subcategories within those. You've got A1, B1, C1, or D1. It means you work one of those categories events, A, B, C, or D, but you're just limited to the floor TD duties. So at big events, you usually get people just working in the back room or people just working on the floor. So at that stage, you become an A1, B1, C1, or D1. And then you got a category A2, B2, C2, D2, which is limited to the back room pairing. So if you're sat on the computer and all you're doing is doing pairings, then you're actually an A2, B2, C2, or D2, depending on how many people are in your event. And there are more categories. Category R is a round robin event. So if you're working at category R, it's a US chess rated round robin with at least 6 players, average rating 1400 or more. And a category team is a team event, which is either team versus team, like the US amateur team events, or a rated Swiss individual with a team component, like at the National Scholastics. So where the top number of players count towards the scores, but teams can have 20 players, but only the top 4 count. That is still counted as a team event, and then we've also got category N, which is national events. N1. So N1 event is players that average over 150 players over the last 5 years. Most of the National Scholastics, I think, sections average meet the N1 category. And then US Championship, US Women's Championship, US Junior. N2 is any other national event that doesn't meet the N1 criteria. And then N3 and N4 are the N1 events, but where you're just limited to floor duties or pairing backroom duties. So that's the categories. We've got category I, international, which is anything that's FIDE rated. And category I events also count as A, B, C, D, R, or T, because, and I guess N as well. But in terms of your US chess experience requirements, they would count towards one of those. So some general guidance, now that we know the categories. Event categories are backwards compatible. So if you work a category A and you're a section chief of a category A event, you can use that towards a category B, C, or D requirement. So events can be used again as experience requirements for upgrading to different levels. So that means if you use an event to go from local to senior, you can also use that event to go from senior to ANTD or to NTD, depending on whether it's eligible to be used for that. In the FIDE world, you can't do that. And then you can actually currently upgrade from any level to any level. So you can, I think most people, if they use this, it's going from senior to NTD like I did. I think ANTD is the one that's skipped most often. I don't think I've seen anyone trying to go from local to ANTD or NTD. That might be a little difficult since you're not meant to theoretically work those events, but
some people have skipped local.
Okay, so some people have gone from club to senior. You must be credited on the MSA event report. So again, I showed that report, and we'll go back to it really quickly here. So if you're looking at this cross table and you don't see your name in one of these slots here, you're not going to get credit for that. So it's very important that you make sure that you get credit for the position you actually worked. And also, if you're trying to upgrade, speak to the chief tournament director prior to the event and say, hey, I'm trying to get upgraded. Can I be section chief? Can I be, whatever? and make sure that you know that going in to the event. And then there's an experience list within the TD affiliate area. So I'm going to show you that. So what this basically does, and a lot of people know it exists, but it gives you an overview of your tournament director experience. So I'm going to quickly see if we can run over here and show you how to get to that. So we're on the US Chess website right now. So I believe if you go to the TD affiliate support area, and then as a tournament director, you should have a login to this area. So let me see, assuming this loads. Come on. I tried not to preload it because I wanted people to be able to see how to get to it.
I usually go to the bottom of the main page. It's on there.
Okay.
Down there.
Yeah, go to the TD affiliate link. So there is an actual TD affiliate link right there on the play. I'm gonna log in. Hopefully no one will see my password.
Also, those categories are defined as any tournament or section of a tournament that has a standalone section. So that's why section chief works as chief, because the section can be considered as a tournament of the size of the section.
Okay. So if I click here, show TD's tournament director experience record.
Do you have someone relatively short? Because this sometimes takes a while to load up.
Well, I was going to pop mine in, but I'm not quite sure I'm relatively short with my experience. So is there anyone in the chat that has
my son is 13008826. That's it.
Okay. 130088
8826.
8826. Okay. And it's not usually this slow to load it up. So 13008826.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can actually look up anyone's tournament director experience, but you can look up your own as well. So this is Matthew Wiewel, Jeff's son. And you can see here where he was the section chief at various events. And you can see at a glance that this one was a 101 event, 101 players in this section. Or you can see that this was 67, but it was a blitz event. Quick rated events. Here he was the 2018 Illinois K8 Championship. He was section chief of a section that had 205. So as a local TD. But, so you can quickly see, has he been chief TD of any events? Or just, there we go. So there's chief TD here. So if you're a chief TD, it will show you that. An assistant chief TD, various things. If you're just listed as an assistant, that's not good enough. So you've got to be one of these assistant chief TDs or section chief, various things. And then this also tells you if you submitted it online for rating, so which is also an important thing. So anyway, so that's how you look up your experience requirement. So within the TD affiliate area. So how do you upgrade to a local? So if you're a club TD, you want to upgrade to a local. In the experience requirements, it tells you must be a chief TD of one category D event. Remember, D is any US chess rated event. So you must be a chief TD, and all these experience requirements have to be met. So chief TD or chief assistant TD of one category D with at least 3+ rounds. And then you must be the chief TD or chief assistant TD of another further category D with 3+ rounds. However, some requirements allow for substitutions, and this is one of these cases. So upgrading to a local, you must be the chief TD of one category D event. You must be the chief TD of chief assistant TD of one category D, 3 or more rounds. And then the third requirement means you've got to be another chief TD or chief assistant TD of one category D, 3+ rounds. However, you can substitute that particular requirement for one of the following. You can be a TD at a category D1 or a D2. You can be a TD at 2 quick or blitz category D1, D2s. Or you can attend a TDCC approved workshop. And the number in parentheses there is the number of events that it can be used towards, since there's only one category D event that can be substituted. You can use one of those. So if you've met the top 2 requirements and you've also attended a TDC approved workshop, you can apply to become a local TD.
Chris, I forgot to mention one more thing to you.
Yep.
We skipped over it. These events that you're listing also have to add up to at least 50 players.
Yes. Okay. So that is also important too. So right. So we need these events to add up, these 3 events to add up to 50 or more players.
And if you're using 2 blitzes, that substitution, you can count the 2 blitz plus the other 2 required ones for 4 of them.
So if you've attended a TDCC approved workshop, do your remaining 2 events have to add up to 50 players?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So that's upgrading to a local. We'll move on to senior. So senior really is chief TD of 5 category C events. Remember, category C were any event between 50 to 99 players, but that also includes category B and A because they're backwards compatible. And then you must also be chief TD or chief assistant TD of a further 1 category C event, and these have to be 4 or more rounds. And then you have to be chief TD of chief assistant TD of 4 more category C events, 4 plus rounds, but these ones allow for substitution. So you can substitute these 4 events with any of the following. So basically, if you look at that, it's 10 category C events. And then, but you can substitute the last 4 events. And those substitutions for the 4 events can be done as follows. Attendance at a TDCC workshop, which can be used for 1 of the events. Chief assistant to an NTD or NTD at category A or B. You can use that to replace 2 of the 4 category C events. And so on down the list. So 2 quick blitz. You can use that twice. So if you work 2 quick or blitz events, that only counts as 1 replacement. So, but if you work 4 of them, that counts as 2 replacements. And you see this is where the C1, C2 stuff comes in. So if you're just limited to floor duties, you can still use it as a substitution for that last requirement. A chief TD of a category R, which was the round robin event. You can use that to substitute 1 of the 4 category C events. Or chief TD of 2 quick or blitz category round robins. You can use that to substitute 1 of those 4 category C events too. So that's basically upgrading to a senior. If you met those experience requirements, you should be eligible to apply for the senior test. Also, you must have submitted 3 events online for rating. So this starts to now say that you should have some experience submitting things online, and I think this came in way back when we started accepting events for rating online. That experience requirement was added because it's a very crucial thing to know. This is the first page of how to upgrade to an associate national. It gets a little more difficult from here. So chief TD of 4 category B events. Now category B, remember, are 100 or more. Chief TD of 1 category B, 1,000 plus in prizes. So this is chief TD of an event or section chief of a category B event, 100 or more players, that offers 1,000 plus in prizes. So for instance, that under 2300 section at National Open I showed counts as meeting that requirement. Chief TD or chief assistant TD of 2 category B, further 2 category B events with $1,000 or more in prizes. But these 2 events can be substituted by the following. So these events, if you've done category C events with $1,000 or more in prizes, you can use that as a substitution. Or if you've done quick or blitz events with $1,000 in prizes, you can use those as substitutions. And then you must also be chief TD, chief assistant TD of 3 category B events. There's no prize, no cash prize sort of restriction on this one. And that one also may be substituted by category C events. And that now says chief TD of 3 category C events. So if you work 3 category C events, you can use that at most as for replacing 1 of those category B events. So if you've worked 9 category C events, Chief TD or Section Chief TD, you can replace all three of those Category B requirements in that bullet point. So again, it's very useful to know these substitutions if you don't have all the 100+ player events. And then we also have a page 2 here. So at this stage, we start requiring you to become Chief TD, Chief Assistant TD to a national tournament director at one of the following events, a Category N or an A event, or 2 Quick Blitz Category N or A. So that most of the time that's something like a Chief Assistant TD to an NTD at one of the national scholastics, which meet Category N. I guess the A events are some of the big events like National Open, World Open, Chicago Open, those things as well. You must be Chief TD of a Category R event now, so you must have the round robin experience. And you've got to have submitted 4 events online for rating, which is not, by this stage, you've probably submitted lots of events online for rating. And then we have National Tournament Director, which is the last one. Here you've got to be Chief TD of 8 Category B events. There's no substitutions for that. Chief TD of a Category B with $1,000+ in prizes. And then we come back to the events that were allowed substitutions for. So a further 2 Category B with $1,000+ in prizes. And again, those are similar to the substitutions we had for the ANTD. And then Chief TD, Chief Assistant TD of 4 Category B events with no prize requirements. And those are allowed to be substituted again for in multiples of 3 Category C events or 6 Category C Quick or Blitz events. And you can substitute all 4 of those events if necessary. You'll see basically the NTD requires you to be a Chief TD or Chief Assistant of 15 Category B events. So if you have that, chances are you can apply for the NTD. There are some other requirements of 2. So you must be Chief Assistant TD to an NTD at a Category N1. Now remember the N1 is an event that averages 150 players or more in the last 5 years, or the US Championship, US Women's Championship, or the US Junior Championship. However, that can be substituted by being Chief Assistant TD to an NTD at a Category N3 or N4. Now remember the N3 or N4 are N1 events, but where you're limited to just the floor or back room. And then Chief TD, Chief Assistant TD to an NTD at 1 further Category N or A event. So you've got to basically work under NTDs to get the NTD experience requirements. And you must also have the round robin requirement. And also additionally, you must have the team requirement here. So, if you must be Chief or Chief Assistant TD to an NTD at 1 Category T event. And basically the Category T event could be, your N1 as above up there. And then you 5 events submitted online for rating. So by this stage, you probably, again, submitted lots of events for rating. Going over to some of the actual test information, now that we know what the experience requirements are, you work out what those means. Someone's asking in the chat what the difference between senior NTD and ANTD is. If you go back and replay this video earlier on, we actually covered the different levels of the TD. So you'll see that information. I don't want to go back over that stuff. All tests are open book, but you can apply to take the local and senior test closed book at a national event. Not many people do that.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Yes, they are hard tests doing them closed book. They should be fairly easier tests doing open book. However, your experience requirements are lowered if you want to take the test closed book. But anyway. So you're honor bound not to discuss tests with others. So if you get sent a test, please don't discuss it or ask other people what the answers are. And the passing grade for all upgrade tests is 80%. I know I said earlier the Club TD, to renew Club TD is 70%, but if you're upgrading, you need at least 80% or more on the test. Now that does mean you can get 1 in every 5 questions wrong, which doesn't seem too bad, but when you're a TD and you're expected to know the rules, working at these events, I think getting 1 in every 5 situations that you're in wrong is probably not good. But anyway, the passing test is 80% for all of these tests. And then also, just to quickly go over some of the tests, what you can expect on the local TD test, it's multiple choice, it's moderate difficulty, and it basically covers that you have a knowledge of the rules. Senior TD is multiple choice and a pairing exercise. It's meant to be a difficult test, and it covers knowledge of the rules and judgment in situations not covered by rules. And yes, someone is asking if the NTD is also open book. Yes, the NTD is also open book. Associate National Tournament Director is now an essay exam, so we move on from multiple choice. That measures the understanding of rules in relation to complex issues. And then the National TD test is a rigorous essay exam, and that actually measures the understanding of some of the philosophies behind the rules. So you're expected to know a little bit more. And Jeff, I think you had a really good thing on these different tests here.
Yeah, when you become a club TD, you essentially have promised that you will read the rule book. But to become a local TD, you'll have to at least read some of the rule book. To become a senior TD, you have to understand the rule book, otherwise you won't be passing the test. To become an associate national TD, you have to be able to extrapolate from the rule book, and the NTD, you have to do something when it's not covered by the rule book. And one reason all of these tests are open book is because at a tournament, you're not expected to leave your rule book at home and not be able to refer to it. It's going to be available to you as well.
That's a great example. So yeah, so all the tests are open book. So you have no excuse for getting any of the questions wrong, right? So anyway, so how do you apply for the test? You got to complete the appropriate experience form. Let me quickly show you where you get the experience forms from. So I'm going to quickly run over to the US Chess website again. Scroll down to the bottom. I don't know if you all know this, but there's a tournament directors page here, which is very useful. It will take you to information on being a tournament director. And within here, it's not quite obvious, but you need other forms. So other forms will bring you to another page. And then we have experience forms here. So NTD experience form. We have the local TD experience form. Let me pull up the senior TD experience form here so you get an example of what this looks like. Basically, it has the space that tells you 10 Category C tournaments, at least 4 rounds, total of at least 400 players. So this is where you pop your Category C events in that you've worked from your overview that you've looked at that tells you that you've worked these events that have 50 or more players in them. And then if you need a substitution, you put substitution in this box here, and then down here you put what your substitutions are. So if you worked some of the other events, or if you worked a TDC approved workshop, you can substitute some of those requirements at the bottom there. And then here you put the events that you submitted online, and then you basically have that completed. So you can get all the tournament director experience forms on the US Chess website. However, if you email that email address at the bottom of the screen there, tdcert-group@uschess.org, and say, hey, I'd like the experience requirement form, please, you can actually be sent a version that's a fillable Word version in. So it makes life a little easier for you and for me when getting the form. So anyway, moving on. You send an email to tdcert-group@uschess.org and say, here's my experience form. I'd like to apply for the senior tournament director test, please. At which stage I will verify that you've met the requirements, and then you'll be sent the test in a PDF format via email. You've got 2 months to complete and return that test. The club and local tests have 40 multiple choice questions. The senior tournament director test has 30 multiple choice questions, and the pairing exercise, even if you do 1 question a day, you should easily get the test completed and still have 3 weeks left approximately to return that test to US Chess. So you should have no excuse once you request that test to not complete it within 2 months. And if you don't return it within 2 months, it counts as an autofill. And why am I saying that's important? Well, because if you fail a test, you have a mandatory waiting period before you can try another variation of the test. For club, local, and senior, that's 2 months if you fail it the first time. And every time you fail it after that, you've got to wait 6 months before you can take the test again. And for associate national and national TD, 3 months for the first failure. And then if you fail again, you have to wait a whole year before you can request the test again. So just be aware that if you don't send it within those 2 months and you get autofilled, you will have to wait at least another 2 months before you can request and be sent another test. So let's move on to trivia. That covers everything here. I think we're way behind schedule. The whole idea of this show is to finish everything within half an hour. I think we bit off a little more than we can chew here, covering tournament director certification. But this is how the trivia will go, folks. So basically, this is the question. And what I'm going to do is, so that you can all enjoy the question here, is have it so that we can answer. You can answer the questions in the chat. So what you're basically going to do is you will answer this by typing either A, B, C, or D in the chat and go for it. So you are the chief TD of a 4-round Scholastic Trophy event with 3 sections. Section A has 40 players, Section B has 35 players, and Section C has 30 players. What category can you claim this event as experience for? Remember, you are now the chief TD of the overall event. So please go ahead and log your votes in there. Hopefully all. Yes. So Terry Winchester is in the chat. Terry, yep. If you're the chief TD of the entire event, that has 3 sections. Go ahead and type in your votes there. Okay, I'm going to cut off the voting really soon. Come on, folks, don't be shy. Go ahead and vote. All right, let's cut off the votes here. And so we had 2 out of 3 people said A. I'm not quite sure where those votes came from, but anyway. And a couple of people said B. Maybe it was taking some of these A's from previously. I think I saw 2 B's in the chat, and of course this is category B. So totaling players here we have, I think that is 105 players in total, and over 100 players counts as the category B event. So the chief TD of this event can claim this as a category B event. So well done to everyone who got that right in the chat. I'm going to reset the poll here, and let's see, and let's bring up question 2. So let's move over here. So question 2 is the exact same event, except now we are just the section chief of all 3 sections in this event. So we're no longer the chief, we are section chief. However, we are section chief of all 3 of these sections. So, and the sections have the same number of players. What category experience does this count as for? So remember, this is different from the previous question where you were the chief TD. So I'll give it a few more. We've got some votes in. Anyone else going to vote in the chat? Come on, folks. I think if you put it with quotes, it doesn't work, Enrique. So type it without quotes real quick. All right. Let's go ahead and close this one off. Oh, Terry's reading the wrong question. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and close that. So we had 2 out of 3 people said category D, and 1 accidentally read the wrong question and said category A. Of course, the correct answer is category D, because you can only claim the experience for the highest, the section with the highest number of players, and so that was indeed section A, which had 40 players, and anything with 40 players is actually a category D event. You need at least 50 players to do category C, so that only counts as category D experience for that section chief. Move on to the next question, question 3. Again, so type A, B, C, or D in the chat. As a local tournament director, which one of the following events should you not be the chief TD of? So we covered earlier what each of the category of TDs could do. They may not or they should not. This is a should not question. So should you not be the chief TD of a 8-player round robin with an average rating of 2200, 150 player Swiss, 120 player Swiss paired on a computer, and you also have an assistant TD, or a team versus team event that has 20 teams of 4 players each? I'll let you do the math on that. So which one of those following events should you not be the chief TD of? Now let's see if we can score 100% on this one. I think we've not scored 100% on the previous just because of accidents. Now come on folks, trivia time. Jeff, what's your answer, Jeff? Are you going to give it away? Go ahead, I'll let you give it away. I'll close the poll.
Is the poll closed now?
Yeah, it's closed.
Then it's B.
B, yeah, and we had 6 people said B, and we scored 100%. We had nobody else that said anything else. So congratulations, folks. Well done. Yes, you're right. It's 150 player Swiss. A local tournament director can be the chief TD of all of the rest of those, whether that's an entire event or a section that has those number of players. So congratulations, folks. So let's go on to the next question. And this is trivia question 4. Which level of TD requires you to be chief TD or chief assistant TD for 4 events or sections within the last 4 years to automatically renew it without needing to take a test? Remember, 1 is 3 years and 3 events, 4 years, 4 events, 5 years, 5 events, 6 years, 6 events. That should easily give away the answer. Which one requires 4 events within 4 years? Go ahead and type A, B, C, or D in the chat. It's either club, local, senior, or associate national TD. No votes yet. Uh-oh. Did we confuse people here? So each level of tournament director, again, allows you, you must test every so many years, but you're allowed to waive that test requirement if you work as a chief TD or chief assistant TD. That includes sections as well, of so many events within the last so many years. And Jeff, I'm going to close the poll now. It looks like we have a few answers in. And Jeff, what's the right answer?
That would be local.
Local TD, that's right. Answer is B. So it goes club is 3 years, local is 4 years, senior is 5 years, NTD is 6 years. And you need three events, 4 events, 5 events, and 6 events as appropriate. So let's... And we have one more trivia question here. So let me set up the poll for trivia question. And the last question was designed to be extremely difficult. So hopefully people won't have to think too hard here. I'm going to do that and move to question number 5. Without using substitutions, how many category C events do you need to have worked to upgrade to senior TD? Without using any substitutions, how many category C events do you need to have worked to upgrade to a senior TD? Now this one's a little more tricky, I think, Jeff, right? I think you have had to have been paying a little bit of attention. So I think, for local, it's three category D events, isn't it? And then senior is a certain number, and NTD I think was 10 category B events, and NTD was 15 category B events. So how many C events without using any substitutions should you wear? We've got some different answers, at least in the chat here. So A and C seem to be popular right now. Let's see. And any more answers before we close the poll? Any more? Any more for any more? All right. Oh, we got one more answer in there. And let's see. Anyone else? No. Okay, let's close it off and announce the results. So we had 66% of people said C, Jeff, and 33% of people said A. And do we know what the right answer is, Jeff?
C is correct for the number of events that you've worked. The people that chose A were thinking of the number you need to be the chief of.
Right. So this is why it was a little confusing. So you must be chief or chief TD of at least 10 category C events to try and apply for the senior TD test. Of course, 4 of those events can be substituted, but you must be chief TD of at least 5 of them. And I think chief TD, chief assistant TD of a further 1, and then you can substitute, I think it's 4 of those events, if my memory serves me right. So that was our trivia portion of the test. And thank you all very much for participating. Let me quickly show you some further information here. So if you're looking for the Tournament Director Certification rules, I think those are on the US Chess website. You can go to that US Chess and down to the Tournament Director link and get them from there. And also, if you need to contact anyone at US Chess to discuss Tournament Director Certification, either apply for a test, ask for an experience requirement form, submit your test for grading, anything along those lines, please use tdcert-group@uschess.org. That way, I know a lot of people respond back to me because I send them the tests, etc. You're better off sending it to this global email address. That way, if I'm not at work for some reason, somebody else will actually get to it and do the job. Jeff, any last thoughts on Tournament Director Certification upgrading your TD level?
Do it when you need to. A lot of times you'll find that you're upgrading simply because you've done enough tournaments to do so.
Exactly. So anyway, that's it for the TD show tonight. We went way over our projected time limit, but hopefully you found this useful. We will record this. It's been recorded, and we'll upload it to our YouTube channel so you can replay it back and get a quick overview at any time. And we should be back next Thursday at 9 o'clock Eastern with episode 2 of the TD show. Have a good night, folks, and it's been a pleasure talking to you all and having some fun and working through this and doing some trivia. Thanks a lot, Jeff, and have a good night, everyone.